Parker had never imagined that buying a home could feel like stepping into a battlefield. The lakeside property he had purchased was perfect in every way. The view of the sun reflecting off the water in the morning, the quiet rustle of trees along the shore, and the sense of isolation that made him feel free from the noise of the city. After decades of working as a civil engineer, had wanted a retreat, a place where he could relax and enjoy the fruits of his labor. He had planned on spending his retirement tinkering in his workshop, reading by the lake, and perhaps fishing on calm afternoons. But his dream quickly collided with reality. The homeowners association in the area, known for its rigid rules and strict enforcement, had made it clear from the moment he signed the papers that living in their community came with conditions that were not just inconvenient, but shockingly expensive. Had known that there would be HOA fees, as most communities required, but he had not anticipated the demand to pay for a new dam. The board's notice had arrived in a large envelope, stamped with the association's emblem and marked urgent. As he read it, his eyes widened. The letter detailed that all residents were required to fund a dam project, ostensibly to reinforce the lakeside and prevent future flooding. The cost assigned to his property alone was $250,000. He reread the number, then rubbed his eyes. There was no mistake. $250,000. Could not believe it. He had carefully budgeted for his retirement, for his hobbies, and for minor renovations on his home, but this sum was astronomical. More than that, it seemed unnecessary. The existing dam had never shown any signs of failure, and years of engineering experience told him that the proposed project was over-engineered and likely overpriced. He scanned the detailed blueprints included with the letter, making notes on the construction materials, the height of the dam, and the lack of proper drainage. It did not take long for him to see what was wrong. The dam, as designed, could create dangerous pressure points and increase the risk of flooding rather than prevent it. Decided he had to challenge the HOA. He called the president of the board, a woman known for her sharp tongue and unyielding sense of authority. Their conversation was tense from the start. Calmly explained his concerns, pointing out the flaws in the design and questioning the cost. Dismissed him without hesitation, repeating that the board's decision was final and that compliance was mandatory. She reminded him that failure to pay would result in fines, liens on his property, and possible legal action. Ended the call frustrated but determined. He would not simply hand over such a massive sum without proof that it was justified. Over the next few days, he spent hours reviewing the engineering plans, comparing them to his own calculations and to industry standards. He even visited the dam at different times of day, examining water flow, the integrity of the materials, and the surrounding terrain. Each visit confirmed his suspicions. The dam was flawed and dangerous. Meanwhile, tension in the community was rising. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones whenever was around. Some were wary of him, sensing he might be a troublemaker, while others privately expressed admiration for his courage to question the board. Despite the warnings, remained focused. He realized that this was not just about money, it was about responsibility, safety, and integrity. Late at night, sat in his study overlooking the lake. He made careful notes, highlighted weak points in the design, and sketched ideas for a plan that would ensure the community was safe without forcing him to pay an unjust sum. He knew he was walking a fine line. The HOA had power, resources, and influence, and a single misstep could make his life miserable, yet felt a spark of resolve he hadn't felt in years. He would not be intimidated, and he would not allow negligence to threaten the homes around him. The stage was set. Parker, a man seeking peace and quiet, now found himself caught in a conflict with a powerful homeowners association. The coming weeks promised to test his patience, his skills, and his moral compass. As he stared out at the serene lake under the moonlight, he made a silent promise. He would find a way to confront the situation, protect the community, and ensure that the truth about the dam could not be ignored. The following week began noticing the subtle ways the homeowners association exerted its control. It was not just the letters or the legal threats. The community seemed to have a constant, watchful eye on every resident. People nodded politely at him in passing, but whispers followed his movements. Children playing near the lake stopped when he approached, and even the dogs seemed to sense tension in the air. The more observed, the clearer it became that the HOA thrived on fear and obedience. He decided to meet a few neighbors privately, hopping to gauge whether anyone else shared his concerns. One afternoon, he walked along a narrow path that led to a quiet corner of the lake, where the houses were set slightly apart from the main community. There he met Julia and a retired couple who had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. They were warm and approachable, but a flicker of caution passed over their faces as soon as mentioned the dam. "They've been pushing this project for months," Julia said, her voice low. "And the cost, they're charging some people even more than you. Nobody dares question them openly." Added, "It's not just the money. The board has a way of making life miserable if you oppose them. Fines, restrictions, endless complaints. They thrive on control." Listened carefully, taking mental notes. This wasn't just a simple financial matter. The HOA's power extended beyond legal threats. It infiltrated the social fabric of the community, isolating anyone who dared to dissent. But Julia and, unlike the others, seemed to admire his courage. They encouraged him to continue questioning the board and warned him to be careful. Over the next several days, noticed the first small signs that the dam might already be creating problems. After a storm, water had pooled near a few homes downstream, causing minor erosion. The homeowners had reported it to the board, but their complaints were dismissed as insignificant. Studied the water flow and the landscape, confirming his earlier assessment. The dam, as designed, could indeed create flooding under certain conditions. Meanwhile, the HOA escalated their pressure. Received another letter from, this time more insistent, warning him of immediate fines if he failed to pay. The letter included language designed to intimidate. "Your continued noncompliance will be met with the full extent of the association's legal resources." It was clear that they wanted not just his money, but his submission. His frustration grew, but he refused to panic. Instead, he spent long evenings reviewing alternative solutions. He sketched plans for how water could be redirected safely if the dam ever failed. He imagined scenarios where minor adjustments could prevent serious damage, and he started to see a way to protect the community while exposing the board's negligence. Yet the tension was palpable. Residents began looking at him with suspicion, and he could sense the board's eyes on him at every meeting. Every smile from a neighbor felt like it might conceal judgment. Every casual conversation seemed loaded with unspoken rules. Realized that in this community, knowledge was power, but silence was currency. Those who spoke out risked isolation. One evening, after inspecting the dam once again, sat on the edge of the lake, his legs dangling over the water. The sun was setting, casting a fiery glow over the treetops. The lake appeared calm, almost serene, but he knew better. Beneath the surface, the potential for disaster simmered. He thought about the people who could be harmed if the board's plan went forward unchecked. He thought about the money being demanded, the fines, and the constant scrutiny. A slow determination settled over him. He would not allow the HOA to control the narrative or endanger the community. He had the skills, the knowledge, and the moral clarity to act, but he would need patience and strategy. That night began keeping a detailed journal of the dam's conditions, the board's communications, and the reactions of residents. Each entry reinforced the same conclusion. The HOA was prioritizing power and profit over safety, and yet also realized that a direct confrontation could backfire. He would need to act cleverly, ensuring that any actions he took highlighted the truth without endangering anyone unnecessarily. By the end of the week, the tension had reached a boiling point. Could feel the weight of the community's gaze and the relentless pressure of the board. But he also felt a growing sense of purpose. This was no longer about resisting an unjust fee. It was about accountability, integrity, and the safety of every resident. And in that quiet, simmering determination, knew that he was preparing for a confrontation that would change the entire community and his own life forever. Parker had spent countless hours observing the dam, reviewing the plans, and calculating the potential risks. Each analysis reinforced what he already suspected. The project was not only grossly overpriced, it was fundamentally flawed. From his engineering experience, he could see that the dam's design created stress points that could fail under heavy rainfall or pressure from the lake's natural expansion. Minor errors in construction could lead to serious damage downstream. He sat at his workbench one evening, blueprints spread before him, and ran through various calculations again. Even with the most conservative assumptions, the numbers did not add up. The design ignored critical overflow channels and underestimated the force of water during peak conditions. The dam, as planned, was not just unnecessary, it was dangerous. Knew he could challenge the HOA legally. He could hire lawyers, file complaints, and draw media attention. But he also understood the reality of fighting a powerful homeowners association. They had deep pockets, extensive influence, and a reputation for retaliating against residents who resisted. Any legal challenge would be long, expensive, and uncertain. Worse, it might not prevent the potential hazard the dam posed while the case dragged on. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The question was no longer about the money. It was about safety and responsibility. Could he allow the board to continue with a project that might threaten the very homes it was supposed to protect? Could he stand by as the HOA ignored engineering standards for the sake of profit and control? Thought about the people downstream, families who had no idea the dam could fail. He imagined the panic and chaos if heavy rain hit and the water surged over poorly designed barriers. He thought about the elderly couple, Julia and who had trusted him with their fears. And he thought about himself, a man who had spent a lifetime designing safe structures, now confronted with a moral choice. The decision crystallized slowly but firmly. Would not comply blindly. He would not allow the HOA to endanger lives or extract an unjust sum from residents. But he also knew that confrontation could not be reckless. Any action he took had to be precise, controlled, and careful. Safety had to come first, or he would compromise everything he stood for. Late at night, began to draft a plan. He sketched out the dam, noting weak points and possible points of intervention. He considered the flow of water, the height of the lake, and the structural vulnerabilities. He imagined redirecting water in a way that would relieve pressure, expose the flaws in the design, and prevent serious damage to the homes downstream. Each sketch, each calculation made him more certain of his course. He could act quietly without anyone realizing until the effects were unavoidable. The HOA would see that their plan was flawed. The residents would see that the dam was dangerous. And most importantly, no one would be seriously harmed if he acted carefully. Still, doubt lingered, understood the gravity of what he was considering. He was contemplating defying a powerful organization, taking direct action that could have consequences beyond anything he had faced in his life. One wrong move could lead to legal trouble, personal ruin, or accidents. The weight of responsibility pressed on him. To prepare mentally, he returned to the lake each evening, walking along the shoreline and observing the water. He measured currents, noted drainage patterns, and reflected on the potential outcomes. He imagined different scenarios: heavy rain, minor overflow, and complete system failure. Each simulation in his mind confirmed that careful intervention could prevent disaster while exposing the HOA's negligence. Also reflected on his own values. Throughout his career, he had always believed that engineers had a duty to protect people. This situation, though unconventional, was no different. He had the knowledge, the skill, and the moral imperative to act. What mattered most was not money, reputation, or compliance. It was the safety and well-being of the community. By the end of the week, had made his decision. He would act, but methodically. He would prepare a controlled plan to relieve the pressure in the dam, expose the flaws in its construction, and ensure that the community understood the risks they had been unaware of. He would not act out of revenge, but out of responsibility. As he sat in his study, looking out at the calm lake beneath the moonlight, felt a mixture of anticipation and resolve. The coming days would require careful planning, patience, and precision. But he was ready. He had made his decision. The HOA had demanded compliance, but he would demonstrate accountability, and in doing so, reveal the truth that no amount of authority could hide. Parker knew that planning alone was not enough. If he was going to act, it had to be done with precision, discretion, and an understanding of every possible variable. The following days were consumed with meticulous observation and preparation. He returned to the dam at dawn and dusk, studying how the water behaved under different conditions. The surface of the lake often seemed calm, but he knew that pressure built quietly beneath, threatening to reveal the flaws he had calculated. He began keeping a detailed journal, documenting the dam's structure, the placement of gates, and the drainage channels. Every measurement was noted, every potential risk considered. created sketches that mapped water flow patterns in extreme conditions, visualizing how adjustments could relieve stress without causing harm. The more he examined the dam, the more convinced he became that his plan could work, but only if executed flawlessly. Next, he gathered tools and materials. Wrenches, clamps, ropes, and temporary barriers were carefully selected and stored discreetly in his garage. Also prepared safety equipment, waterproof boots, gloves, a helmet, and a waterproof flashlight. He had learned over decades of engineering work that even the smallest oversight could turn a controlled project into a disaster. Every item was tested and checked. Nothing was left to chance. Also anticipated potential interruptions. The HOA board was vigilant, and any unusual activity near the dam could raise suspicion. He devised schedules for inspection and intervention that minimized the risk of detection. Late nights, early mornings, and times when the community was distracted would be his windows of opportunity. He mapped escape routes and hiding spots, ensuring that if someone approached, he could respond without confrontation. A particularly tense evening occurred when a board member, Mrs. Langley, appeared unexpectedly while was taking measurements. Her presence sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He froze behind a tree, holding his breath as she inspected the water line. She muttered something to herself about the recent rains and walked away, leaving shaken but relieved. The encounter reinforced the necessity of caution and reminded him that the HOA was always watching. Despite the pressure, found solace in his technical expertise. Each calculation reinforced the feasibility of his plan. He visualized the process step by step, opening a section of the dam to release water gradually, directing flow to prevent damage, and monitoring pressure to ensure the system remained stable. In his mind, he walked through multiple scenarios, imagining unexpected rainfall, debris in the channels, or sudden shifts in the water level. For each, he devised contingencies. The exercise was exhausting but necessary. As days passed, also reflected on the ethical dimension of his plan. He did not want to punish the HOA or the residents personally. His goal was to expose negligence and protect the community. He imagined the moment when the board would see their flawed construction and understand that their decisions had consequences. He envisioned the residents realizing that safety and responsibility were more important than authority or financial gain. This moral clarity gave him confidence and steadied his nerves. One evening after a storm had passed and the lake reflected the soft glow of the setting sun, performed a final survey. He measured water levels, checked for leaks, and confirmed the integrity of temporary barriers. Everything aligned with his calculations. The plan could work, and it could work safely if executed with care. He felt a surge of quiet determination. The coming days would require courage, patience, and focus, but he was ready. Returned to his home, exhausted yet focused. He reviewed his journal one last time, double-checking every measurement and sequence. He set aside tools, packed essential supplies, and mentally rehearsed the process. Every step had been accounted for. The plan was clear. As night fell over the lake, looked out from his porch. The community was asleep, unaware of the preparation unfolding in one of their own homes. The water shimmered under the moonlight, calm yet full of latent power, just as he had anticipated. Tomorrow, the first steps of action would begin. For the first time since receiving the HOA's demand, felt a sense of control. He was no longer a passive participant in this conflict. He was ready to act, ready to reveal the truth, and ready to protect the community from a disaster they did not yet understand. The night was unusually quiet when Parker finally decided the time had come to act. The streets of the community were empty, the wind whispered through the trees, and the lake's surface reflected the pale glow of the moon. Every sense was heightened as he approached the dam with his carefully packed tools. Months of planning, calculations, and preparation had led to this moment. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders, but he also felt a quiet determination. This was not a reckless act. It was a calculated intervention, a step toward exposing truth and protecting the community. Moved with precision, checking the alignment of gates and examining the structure one last time. He double-checked the safety barriers he had installed, ensuring that water could flow without overwhelming the downstream areas. Every measurement had been rehearsed, every contingency considered. Still, the tension was palpable. One miscalculation could lead to unintended consequences, and knew that he could not afford even a minor error. He began by carefully opening the first sluice gate, a section of the dam designed to relieve pressure slowly. Water gushed through the channel, creating a controlled flow that followed the path had mapped in his diagrams. He monitored the movement closely, watching as it spread into the designated overflow area. The lake's level began to drop slightly, and the tension in the dam's structure eased. So far, everything was going exactly as he had predicted. As the water moved, noticed the first signs of the board's panic. Lights flickered on in nearby homes, and the distant sound of a vehicle moving quickly suggested that someone was investigating. He stayed calm, crouched behind a protective barrier, and continued to monitor the flow. Every adjustment had to be measured, every decision deliberate. The success of his plan depended on patience as much as technical skill. Had anticipated the possibility of someone discovering him. When a board member appeared at the edge of the water, flashlight in hand, he remained hidden in the shadows, using natural cover and timing his movements carefully. He allowed just enough of the dam to open to relieve pressure, preventing any real damage while simultaneously revealing structural weaknesses. The water spread gradually, bypassing vulnerable homes, and creating a controlled scene that highlighted the flaws in construction without endangering anyone. The moments stretched into hours. His body ached from crouching and moving heavy tools, but he remained focused. Each adjustment to the gates required careful calculation. He measured water levels, inspected overflow channels, and ensured that no debris could block the flow. His mind ran through every scenario he had rehearsed, comparing each to the reality unfolding before him. Minor deviations occurred, but he adapted instantly, correcting course and keeping the situation under control. Eventually, the initial surge subsided and allowed the flow to continue at a steady, controlled rate. The dam, previously under dangerous stress, now showed the consequences of poor design. Leaks, pressure points, and areas of erosion that were clearly visible. From his vantage point, could see the board members arriving in small groups, assessing the situation in real time. Their expressions were a mixture of shock, confusion, and anger, confirming what he had anticipated. The flaws in the project were undeniable. Despite the tension, felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had acted responsibly, protecting the residents while revealing the truth. The water flowed exactly as planned, controlled and contained. Homes remained safe, and the hazard that had been quietly building for months was now visible for all to see. He had succeeded in demonstrating the risks of the HOA's plan without creating panic or injury. As the first light of dawn touched the lake, completed his final checks. He closed the gates gradually, ensuring the water settled into a stable level. The damage was minimal, contained to areas that had been prepared, but the lesson was clear. The dam had been mismanaged, and the board could no longer claim ignorance. Residents would wake to a visible reminder of their leadership's errors, and the HOA would have to face accountability for their decisions. Packed his tools, carefully hiding evidence of his intervention, and returned to his home. The adrenaline still surged, but he allowed himself a moment of relief. He had acted decisively, ethically, and effectively. The conflict with the HOA was no longer theoretical, it had been brought into the open. The coming days would be tense, filled with questions, investigations, and reactions, but knew he had acted with integrity. As he sat on his porch, watching the calm lake and the rising sun, he allowed himself a brief smile. For the first time since the HOA demanded $250,000 for a questionable project, he felt in control. The plan had worked. The flaws were exposed. And the community, whether they realized it yet or not, was safer because of his courage, skill, and careful preparation. By the time the sun rose over the community, the quiet tension that had dominated the night gave way to a flurry of activity. Residents emerged from their homes, drawn to the lake and the dam, where the controlled release of water had left visible evidence of mismanagement. Some walked cautiously along the shoreline, peering at erosion, minor flooding, and water flowing through newly visible channels. The scene was dramatic, but thanks to careful planning, no home had suffered serious damage. Word traveled quickly. The HOA board scrambled to respond, their usual aura of authority shaken. And her senior members appeared at the dam within the hour, their faces a mixture of alarm and confusion. They inspected the gates, the water flow, and the weak points had exposed, struggling to understand how such a situation could have occurred. Their carefully maintained image of competence was now under threat, and for the first time they were forced into reactive rather than proactive action. Residents gathered in small groups along the lake, whispering, pointing, and speculating, remained at a distance, watching the unfolding scene from the shadows. Some neighbors looked upset, concerned about the minor flooding and disruption, but others exchanged quiet nods of respect and approval. For the first time, it seemed, the community recognized that the HOA had acted irresponsibly, prioritizing authority and profit over safety. Investigators arrived shortly after the initial commotion. Sent by the county to assess potential damage and compliance with construction and safety codes, they moved efficiently along the dam and surrounding areas. Meticulous documentation and careful planning ensured that all potential hazards had been mitigated. As the investigators noted visible flaws, leaks, and areas of erosion, they recorded their observations without yet knowing how the situation had been orchestrated. Attempted to assert control, speaking to the residents and media who had begun gathering. She emphasized that the situation was under review and that the board would address all concerns. Her statements, though intended to calm the community, only served to highlight her lack of preparation. The dam's weaknesses were undeniable, and the residents began to question the board's competence more openly than ever before. Meanwhile, observed Julian, who had been among the first to notice the controlled water flow. They approached him cautiously, nodding in acknowledgement. "You were right," Julia said quietly. "The dam, it wasn't safe." Added, "We've been warning them for years, but nobody listened. You made sure people could see the truth." Allowed himself a small, private smile. He had acted carefully, ethically, and successfully without causing harm, and his community had recognized the significance of his actions. By midday, the story had reached local media outlets. Journalists arrived, cameras in hand, recording the water's controlled release and interviewing residents. Remained unobtrusive content to let the evidence speak for itself. The HOA could no longer claim that their construction was sound or that their decisions were unquestionable. Every photograph, every video, and every report documented what had been saying all along. The dam was flawed, overpriced, and poorly designed. Within the community, reactions were mixed. Some residents were upset about the minor flooding, concerned about inconveniences and potential damage. Others quietly acknowledged the necessity of actions, understanding that without intervention, the dam could have caused far more serious problems in the future. Conversations shifted from speculation to accountability. The board could no longer dictate terms unchallenged, and residents began to discuss reforms, transparency, and safety protocols. As the day ended, returned to his home, physically exhausted but mentally at ease. He had executed his plan without harm, exposed the HOA's negligence, and sparked a community-wide reevaluation of leadership and responsibility. The conflict that had begun as a financial demand had transformed into a broader lesson in ethics, safety, and accountability. Sat on his porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, reflecting on the day's events. The lake was calm again, the water level stabilized, and the subtle traces of his intervention were visible but controlled. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The community had witnessed the consequences of negligence firsthand, and change, however slow, had begun. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax. The dam, the HOA, and the residents' reactions had all aligned to reveal the truth. The fallout was intense, but it was just the beginning of accountability and reform. Knew that the coming days would bring questions, investigations, and difficult conversations, but he also knew that he had acted responsibly, ethically, and decisively. For him, the controlled flood was not about revenge. It was about truth, safety, and ensuring that the community could never ignore responsibility again. In the days following the controlled flood, the community was buzzing with conversation, speculation, and reflection. The visible flaws in the dam had sparked more than curiosity. They had forced the homeowners association to confront the consequences of their decisions. Residents attended emergency meetings, both formal and informal, questioning board members and demanding accountability. And the board attempted to maintain authority, but the tide of scrutiny was relentless. Investigators continued their assessment of the dam, carefully documenting erosion, structural weaknesses, and evidence that the original design had been over-engineered and unsafe. Their reports confirmed what had calculated weeks earlier. The findings were unambiguous. Had the dam been left unchecked, significant flooding could have occurred, potentially endangering homes and lives. The evidence left the HOA with little room to maneuver. Despite his careful planning and ethical approach, was initially summoned for questioning. The investigators wanted to understand how the water had been released and whether anyone had acted outside legal boundaries. Presented his documentation, detailed sketches, measurements, and observations showing that he had acted methodically, safely, and with full concern for the community's well-being. He explained that the controlled release had been carefully managed to prevent damage while exposing the structural flaws. After reviewing the evidence, the investigators cleared of wrongdoing. They acknowledged that his intervention, while unconventional, had prevented potential disaster and highlighted negligence that the HOA had ignored for months. His technical expertise and careful planning were praised, and his ethical considerations noted. The official conclusion was clear: had acted responsibly, prioritizing safety and transparency over compliance with an unjust demand. Meanwhile, the residents began to recognize actions as a turning point for the community. Julia and were among the first to approach him openly, expressing gratitude and respect. Other neighbors, once hesitant to speak, began sharing their own experiences of the HOA's rigid policies and excessive fees. The community started to see the need for reform, transparency, and shared responsibility, rather than unquestioning obedience to a powerful board. The HOA, under mounting pressure, announced that it would review its policies, the dam project, and implement new procedures to ensure safety and fairness. Once the embodiment of control and authority found herself facing difficult questions from both residents and investigators. The board's credibility had been shaken, and they could no longer dismiss concerns without consequence. Some members resigned quietly, while others publicly committed to change. Though relieved, remained thoughtful. He understood that while the immediate threat had been addressed, the community's culture of oversight and accountability would require continued attention. He participated in planning sessions for new safety protocols, sharing his engineering expertise and advocating for responsible decision-making. His contributions were valued not for confrontation, but for clarity, knowledge, and integrity. Over time, the community began to heal and rebuild trust. Minor repairs were made to the dam under proper engineering supervision, and the board implemented transparent communication channels for residents to voice concerns. Homeowners felt safer, more informed, and more engaged in the decisions that affected their properties. The lesson was clear. Leadership required responsibility, accountability, and respect for expertise. Reflected on the resolution as he walked along the lakeshore one morning. The water was calm, the repaired dam stable, and the community slowly returning to its rhythm. He felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. The project that had once threatened homes and safety had become a catalyst for accountability and reform. He had acted decisively, ethically, and effectively, and the community had benefited as a result. While the conflict with the HOA had tested him, understood that standing up for what was right often required courage, patience, and careful planning. The resolution was not just about exposing negligence. It was about demonstrating that individuals could make a difference when guided by knowledge, ethics, and responsibility. As he watched the sunlight glint off the lake's surface, knew that the community had taken its first steps toward a safer, more accountable future. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a profound sense of peace. The immediate crisis was over, the lessons had been learned, and the community, though shaken, was stronger for it. Parker had not only confronted a powerful organization, but he had also reminded everyone that integrity, expertise, and careful action could triumph over authority when applied thoughtfully and responsibly. The weeks following the controlled release of water from the dam brought a mixture of reflection, rebuilding, and cautious optimism to the community. The immediate crisis had passed, but its lessons lingered in every conversation, every planning session, and every inspection of the repaired structures. Parker, once an outsider challenging the homeowners association, had become a quiet but respected presence. His actions, though unconventional, had reshaped the community's understanding of accountability and safety. Residents who had once whispered behind closed doors now spoke openly about their concerns. Meetings that had previously been dominated by the board's strict directives became collaborative discussions. Homeowners suggested safety checks, drainage improvements, and emergency preparedness protocols. With his years of engineering experience, was consulted frequently, not as a rebel, but as a trusted advisor. He provided guidance on long-term water management, ensuring that the dam and surrounding areas were structurally sound and safe for years to come. The former president of the HOA had stepped down quietly, her reputation diminished by the events. Some board members remained, but the majority had been replaced by individuals committed to transparency and responsible decision-making. The community slowly began to heal from the tension and fear that had dominated the months of conflict. Residents realized that their voices mattered, that oversight was crucial, and that safety could not be sacrificed for authority or profit. Spent time reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The confrontation with the HOA had been stressful, exhausting, and morally complex. He had risked social alienation, legal scrutiny, and personal fatigue to act responsibly. Yet the outcome validated his careful approach. He had not acted out of anger or revenge, but from a deep sense of responsibility to protect the community and ensure that truth and expertise prevailed over negligence. Julia and the retired couple who had quietly supported him from the beginning invited over for tea one afternoon. They spoke of the relief and gratitude they felt, not only for the safety of their homes but for the example had set. "You didn't just stop a potential disaster," Julia said. "You reminded all of us what it means to take responsibility and stand by what's right." Nodded in agreement, emphasizing that the community had learned lessons that money could never teach. So's life settled into a new rhythm. He continued his engineering hobbies, explored the lake, and spent quiet mornings reviewing water patterns. Yet now, his presence carried a subtle weight of respect from neighbors who had previously ignored or judged him. They approached him with questions, ideas, and concerns, and he offered guidance with patience and care. What had begun as a solitary struggle against an uncompromising board had transformed into a role of quiet leadership, based on knowledge and ethics rather than authority. The repaired dam stood as a symbol of accountability and careful planning. Water flowed steadily and safely, and the minor damage that had occurred during its controlled release had been repaired under professional supervision. Signs of the earlier flaws were visible only to those who looked closely, serving as a subtle reminder of the risks that had been narrowly avoided. The community had been spared serious harm, but the memory of the event ensured that vigilance and responsibility would remain priorities. Reflected on the broader implications of his experience, he realized that standing up for what is right is rarely easy. It requires patience, preparation, and a willingness to act when necessary, even in the face of opposition. Leadership, he understood, is not simply about authority. It is about knowledge, foresight, and the courage to act ethically. The conflict with the HOA had tested all of these qualities, and in doing so it had strengthened both him and the community. As the sun set over the lake one evening, stood on his porch, watching the calm water ripple gently in the fading light. The community had survived, learned, and grown. Homes were safe, relationships were slowly mending, and the HOA had begun to operate with newfound transparency. He felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that his careful, responsible actions had made a lasting difference. Parker, who had arrived seeking peace and quiet, had found something far greater: a renewed understanding of the importance of responsibility, a community capable of learning from its mistakes, and the knowledge that one individual, acting thoughtfully and ethically, could shape the course of many lives. The ordeal was over, but the lessons would endure, quietly guiding the community toward a safer, more accountable future. The lake shimmered in the last light of day, calm and steady, just as it hoped it would be. He smiled to himself, knowing that for now, balance had been restored. The story of the dam, the HOA, and the controlled flood had ended, but its impact would resonate for years, reminding everyone that responsibility, knowledge, and careful action are the true foundations of a strong and safe community. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.